Welcome to Advanced Nurses. We connect with nurses who inspire other nurses by sharing their experiences. And so we're able to bring that information to you. Hi, I'm the educational consultant for advanced nurses at ACD4N, and I have the pleasure of meeting with Veniese Wilkinson. She is going to kind of give us a background experience of her
Educational
journey
journey.
at the University of Pennsylvania. And we're going to also just explore about what that experience is of being a quote unquote minority student on it's- in an institution like University of Penn. If you don't mind, you can just introduce yourself and just kind of give, just a short background of um, what your journey and then to what you're doing now, and then just kind of just go back to what that experience was on campus as far as it specifically relates to diversity.
Oh, thank you, Raquel. I'm Veniese Wilkinson. As you can see, the two letters by my name. In my previous life, I was a lawyer, but maybe once a lawyer, always a lawyer. When you talk about, so I grew up in Philadelphia, went all of my life to the public schools of Philadelphia before matriculating to the University of Pennsylvania. Right now, I'm actually a lecturer at FPT University in Hanoi, Vietnam. So I've been living abroad in Asia for nearly the past 20 years. So I've been experiencing a different kind of diversity and inclusion. In my time at Asia, I've also been involved in alumni admissions for University of Pennsylvania. So again, I've been dealing with diversity and inclusion in a very different context, but still always very much pro expanding the family of University of Pennsylvania. When you talk about my experience, I'm sorry, were you about to say something?
No, I was saying thank you. I think that was a nice way to kind of summarize that, but thank you. Yeah, and please go on.
My experience at Penn is I matriculated to Penn at a time after an infamous water buffalo incident had happened at Penn, and it had been spoken about in many academic circles, and a number of conservative media used that. I'm not going to get into details of it, but it was a racial incident involving Black students and white students. And the president at that time was Sheldon Hackney, and he became associated with everything that the conservative media thought was wrong with liberal, progressive, quote unquote, elitist education, even though all of these people had come from liberal, progressive, elitist universities. But when I joined Penn, at that time, I really felt that Penn was trying to become more diverse. They had been sued by the city of Philadelphia for not actually accepting more applicants from the city of Philadelphia. And so part of I feel like I benefited from affirmative action in a broad way, because a lot of times when people think about affirmative action, they are so focused on race that they don't think about what affirmative action means. It means that they're trying to remedy some kind of wrong that or some kind of inequity. And in my case, it was not accepting students from the city in which you benefit financially, and otherwise. And under the guise of that affirmative action program, it actually, when I saw who my cohort that benefited from them, from that affirmative action program, it was mainly Caucasian students. So it was mainly white students who had gone to Philadelphia public high schools. And as a result of this program that I was brought in under, what I think Penn recognized and what I think many universities recognize, not just the selective ones, is that when you have diversity in the classroom, that helps with understanding medicine, psychology, literature, philosophy, because people come from different backgrounds, they have different perspectives. And the reason why I mentioned that program in Philadelphia is because there are every umbrella, every program that has ever been created to target diversity, if it does not specifically mention the word Black, you will find that it is another group that has benefited from that program, mostly on the whole. I just want to make that clear. And my experience at Penn is, I think, similar to experience that a lot of students might have at other predominantly white institutions, in that most of the Black people that you find on Penn's campus when I was there, and I just celebrated my 25th reunion from graduating from Penn, what you're going to find is that now a lot of those students are coming from a Caribbean or Latin American, South American, or African background. So I did actually get a chance to meet with the class of 1975, those Black students, and they were predominantly African American. And so I thought it was interesting that as Penn expanded the amount of, when Penn started targeting getting more Black people in the institution, and this is true, when I was studying at Penn, I had an opportunity to meet Black students studying at Yale, Harvard, Cornell, Brown, even Dartmouth, but certainly Columbia and MIT and other NYU, other universities. And I found that those Black people were predominantly, again, first generation or second generation immigrants to the US. And the reason why I mention that is I was born in Jamaica. So I am first, like certainly the first generation immigrant going to Penn. And while it made being Jamaican at the time when I was at Penn made me feel very comfortable, because I was surrounded by many Jamaicans and many Caribbean students. But in the years that have followed, and I had an opportunity to reflect upon it, I could even see that there was maybe even a way that I was being weaponized against African Americans, in the sense that I come in with a Black face. So that is very helpful for the university. But the remedy that the group that really needs compensation are African Americans. And while I do suffer, to quote Shakespeare, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune of being a Black person who grew up and lived most of their life in America. It's still, now I realize, like, bringing me in did not remedy that injury or that wrong. And what ended up happening, if I could just summarize my time at Penn, I found it to be a life-changing time. It was great. It wasn't always roses. I lived in W.E.B. Du Bois College House, which was controversial from its founding on the University of Pennsylvania's campus. It received bomb threats a number of times while I was a resident there. There were a number of people who, I don't think anyone ever said to me, you're here because you're Black and affirmative action. I cannot say that people said that to me. What I do know is that there are people that discounted there was a discounting of whether or not I should have a say in order how to prioritize what I'm saying in the classroom. So maybe another person, we should listen to them more. Their opinion is valued more. But also there's just a lot of strange things that was said to me that somehow I benefited from, my family benefited from being enslaved in the Americas, because look at Africa. Africans are suffering. Like, isn't it great that I got an opportunity to get a rewording of my name, to lose whatever connection, genealogical, cultural connection that white people then get to trace with glee through ancestry23.com, or Asian people might know from their last name. So all of those things did play a role in my time at Penn. However, I never felt like, there were people who did not want me to be there and made that clear, but I cannot say anyone said to me, you're not smart enough to be here. They were more blatant. They were just like, yeah, we don't deny your intelligence, your intellect, all of that. We just don't want you here. We just think this university would be better not having it'd be better if it was majority white people. And I remember one day, and then I'll pause so you can jump in. I remember one day a white friend of mine came running to me, panting, a girl running to me panting like, Venice, you'll never guess what I just found out. I found out that nearly 80% of the women at Penn identify as Jewish, or at least 80% in our class identify as Jewish. I don't know if that number was true. What I do know at Penn, and I found it quite interesting, is that even a number of the African-American Blacks were half Jewish. Even some of the Asian students were half Jewish or adopted by Jewish families. And I only bring that up to say, in that when we are talking about affirmative action or diversity on campus, there's a lot of things that are happening on campus. At Penn, we have Hillel House, which is an institution to provide, I think, a safe haven, but also a cultural space for Jewish students. And I personally, I used to eat in Hillel House dining quite a bit. And I saw that a number of Jewish students, both Black and white Jewish students, sometimes would be a bit upset when I would join them for dinner. But again, you can't discriminate, it's open to all. And I brought up the Jewish students just to say there are, to go full circle to what I was saying about coming in as part of the kind of Philadelphia students experiment. I brought all of that up to say that diversity is happening on so many levels at all institutions, especially the selective ones. I think that
So
this is it.
so I just didn't want to jump in and cut you off. Are you finished what you were saying?
I am.
Because when you're saying that, it's kind of getting my wheels turning because of like, well, as you know, both of the when I went and got my bachelor's degree and then went to graduate school, both of the schools that I went to were which was considered PWIs, and uh, one was a state school, the other one was within that kind of Catholic network of universities. And when you're saying what you're saying about diversity, I'm thinking about my own experiences. I did not see a lot of representation on my campus, but then now, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, oh, wow, my campus life, in retrospect, maybe there was a lot more diversity than I'm actually thinking and like kind of considering. Because then whatever happens in those institutions, you kind of really get an idea of where the like classifications come in. So when you're saying this diversity, I see a lot of it kind of being like the blueprint of what we see once individuals graduate and they go into the workforce.
100%.
um so because I'm just thinking about that because of the fact that, again, when we think about affirmative action, so much conversation around that is like goes to this, well, what are the blacks going to do now? And I think a lot of the reason why the focus is there is because I think a lot of people just understand clearly. I mean, whether it's something they want to say out loud and want to whisper it at the water machine, or just talk
Yes.
quietly
Yes.
amongst their friends. The truth is that most people understand that affirmative action, like you mentioned earlier, is to right a wrong. And the wrong, you can clearly see the group that is affected most by it, because this is the group that has been exploited historically on so many different levels at so many different segments of as this nation is developed, you know and to make the nation what it is today. I mean, that's just a part of the thread and of the each thread of the cloth of this country. So it's not as if people don't recognize the need to right that wrong for, like you said, specifically for blacks. However, it appears that, as with many policies, you start off targeting one group, you kind of get everybody rally behind the cause. You see that it's this kind of symbolic gesture to show everyone, look, we're trying to right this wrong, whether it's for national issues or just to kind of a great show of the United States. Look at this, look at the great things that we're trying to do to right this wrong. But then when they actually go to execute these policies, it's almost as if those individuals who are the gatekeepers, they don't really want to see too much change, right? Not too much change, not too fast, and still want people to kind of hold on to certain privileges and rights. So speaking of that, it kind of makes me think about merit. You brought up merits in a bit by kind of describing uh, this feeling you said that at times maybe I guess in your classrooms it almost it seemed as if that your thoughts or your opinions were not prioritized or not valued as your like white counterparts. And obviously, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure even with this diversity you identified, you still felt like a minority, correct? Or
Oh,
would you
yes.
still say that? Okay, all right. So here's the question that I have for you then. So from your experience, as far as because there's been a lot of conversation around legacy admissions. This is something that, like, you hear it and you kind of know because, of course, you know the whole scandal that came out with that actress, like her name. I'm drawing
The
a blank
two
on her name.
actresses, Felicity Hoffman and Lori McLaughlin.
Thank you. So, when you hear stories like that, it just kind of gives you like a little peek into what, resources, and having access to money, how you can, just like as if you buy a car, you buy a house in a nice neighborhood, and then you can also pay for your children's admissions into, these top schools that everyone's fighting to get into, and your kids can go there, even if your kids just want to go there and party, right? They
Yes,
just want to go there as like a getaway. Now, of course, when you're growing up in neighborhoods where you have limited resources and this information or just exposure to college campus life, or the benefits of having higher education, when you really don't know what the benefits are, you don't sometimes even envision yourself as being there. You may have the ambitions and goals to go places in your life or to be something, or you may think to yourself, I want to be X, Y, and Z position. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a manager. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be in a suite. I want to be executive. I want to, whatever it is, this profession is that you want to, you know, you want to become in your life. You know that going through an institution or going through college is probably the path that you're going to have to take to get there. Okay, so with all of that being said, do you believe that um, when you're talking about legacy children, right, these legacy admissions, how is their expression, or have you encountered them having a different expression of what it is that they want to be? Because I guess the reason why I said all of that is because I think to myself that on one end, if I could just kind of create almost like a spectrum here, on one end of the spectrum you have, these underserved, rather kind of, in the dark about what to do next. Um, s- children coming out, or students coming out of these inner city school systems that we know are under resourced, and you have like these really privileged, children coming from better resources schools where they're preparing them from high school, maybe even from middle school. They're preparing them for, to go to college, even if they're just going to college just to learn about music or learn about art or whatever it is that their heart desires. Because in many cases, these children they'll be okay, right? Mom and dad has a trust or something set aside for them. So they're going to college, not really for survival, but more for exposure, right? So have you had an encounter with, let's see, these legacy students that may have had, let's say they've expressed to you kind of like, oh, I'm just kind of here because my grandpa, went to here, and we, we made a donation here, or we we paid for this library or that, hall, or any experience like that.
I- so what I will say is I didn't have that experience. I did have the experience of people's parents who did pay for things that were in, I'm speaking specifically for my class and maybe the one below, because Donald Trump Jr. did attend Penn at the same time I attended Penn. So his father, another category, but also Michael Milken's son, Michael Milken, the junk bond king. His son also attended Penn at the same time I was there. And what you have with some of these students is, it's not that they specifically said something. It was that their parents were on campus speaking affirmatively about what they were going to be doing, projects or scholarships or money that they would be giving the university, not as a result of their child going to the university, but kind of like, and now the legacy continues. Like, now my son is coming, because there were a number, when junior comes, that the senior usually is there to follow and make some pronouncements. What I would tell you is this story. I used to work in the office of the president of University of Pennsylvania. And one of the things I would open up, this was a time when people still wrote letters. I would open up the letters that were sent to the president. And I would quickly type, this was my work study job, I'd quickly type a small summary of it so that the staff that I was working with, like the actual people who work at Penn and professional women, primarily it was women that I worked with, they could then sort the mail to see, number one, does this require a response? If so, who should respond to it? How formal the response? And what struck me, two things. What struck me is the amount of letters that we would get from alums. So alums, their children, grandchildren would obviously apply for Penn, but in particular, their grandfathers would write letters to the president to say things like, I just want to let you know that my grandson or granddaughter has applied to Penn. And this was before the acceptance letters would even go out. I think it would be great to take a photo on Locust Walk with my granddaughter and you. And one of the things that I noticed that was very interesting, there was a gentleman who, I forgot how he described his background. I believe his background was he was an American, but background, let's say lineage from Western Europe. And he was very upset that his grandson did not get into Penn. And it was very interesting. He said he believed that his grandson did not get into Penn because Penn wanted to promote diversity and had gone out of their way to recruit students from Eastern Europe who do not speak English well. So, oh, this is a very interesting argument. And then there was a group of students who also wrote in upset about a grade they had gotten in a French class because they said the French teacher had given them a grade lower than what they expected, and then had offered to tutor them to get them to a more desirable grade, or some of them that failed to get them to a passing grade. And it was interesting because I could tell from the tone, of the people writing the French letters, there's a way that lets me know. I'm not saying maybe they weren't white, but they were writing from a place of privilege. And I'm going to use that to go back to when I first started at Penn. When I got to Penn, they'd either just started a few years before or the year I started to implement a foreign language requirement. I purposely, I will admit to this, I wanted to just take Spanish. I knew that I'm pretty good at, not good at languages, but good at doing well in language classes. So I purposely, when I was taking the Spanish, because they made us take a placement test, when I was taking the Spanish placement test, I was getting certain things wrong, because I said, I don't want Spanish to be a hard class for me. I don't want this language requirement to take up too much of my time. But I said, I don't want to seem like a total idiot. So I purposely made sure I got a decent low score. And to my delight, University of Pennsylvania said, you have tested into the lowest level of Spanish. I was like, this is fantastic. Because I know that I'm actually at a higher level, I can hurry up and get this foreign language requirement done. The week before I was supposed to start Penn, I got a letter saying, good news, some students complained that the Spanish language placement test was unusually difficult. Therefore, you have been bumped up into the second level. And what I thought to myself was, I went to an underfunded Philadelphia public high school and studied Spanish. And I'm 100% certain the people who complained went to an overfunded, over-resourced school. And that was the first time when I really came face to face with how other people's mediocrity is really, that is part of the whole affirmative action stew. That Spanish test was not unusually difficult. And I didn't get a great immersive Spanish language education. That was not true, but the university, again, just bent over. And the reason why I mention these three incidences is because this kind of thing is all part of the privilege that is tied to legacy. We know our rights. We are the standard. And legacy admissions, honestly, within 5 years of graduating from Penn, Penn sent me a postcard that said, will your child be in the class of blah, 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 blah. So very much from 5 years out at Penn, Penn is already telling alums, recruiting for the next class. And every year at the 5-year mark, they said it to me, 10-year mark, Penn is still waiting for my children that I don't have, right? But there is very much, and Penn, like all these other universities, there is an alumni office of admissions. There is special help that my child can get to navigate the alumni or to navigate the admission space. And also, I know the person who is head of admissions at Penn, or head of the alumni admissions and those groups, yes, I went to Penn with them. So it's not, do you know what I mean? There are certain things, a certain access that everyone, by virtue of being an alum, you get to go around, you get to leap over. There is a bridge, they let down the drawbridge for you to walk across. And that drawbridge, at the end of that drawbridge, it doesn't have to be Penn, because I can use, because there's a lot of even Ivy League and Seven Sisters alumni affinity groups that I can use to divert my imaginary child to Williams or Stanford or Dartmouth. So when we talk about legacy, I want to mention one book by a dear professor. She was a law professor at the University of Pennsylvania University of Pennsylvania Law School for about a decade or more, and before she moved on to Harvard. But Lonnie Grenier wrote a book called The Tyranny of Meritocracy, Democratizing Higher Education in America. And it is, to me, a must read. I think it is one of the most important books looking at the current state of higher education in America. And Lonnie Grenier, her inspiration for the book was her father, who had studied in Jamaica. Her father's born in Jamaica, and he had an opportunity to come to America. Her father got into Harvard University many years ago, and he was unable to attend Harvard University for a number of reasons, a lot of them being financial. But for her father, he told Lonnie Grenier that story. And I think about how her father then was able to rear this woman who not only attended Harvard, but also became a professor at Harvard. And Langston Hughes's poem, I think the first Langston Hughes poem that most people learn is about a dream deferred, like what happens to a dream deferred. And in Lonnie Grenier's father's case, is not that he just gave up on life. He saw the vision. He saw the vision for his daughter. And of course, like many Jamaicans, she went above and beyond. But this book, I think, is the most important book written in the last 10 years about higher education. As the title says, The Tyranny of Meritocracy, the story that you tell yourself about how you got to where you are ends up framing how you see those who come behind you. If you think I worked hard, but there were a lot of factors that actually bolstered me and got me to where I am, then you then have that same kind of empathy, openness, when looking at people coming behind you. But if you think it was all me, I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps, even though the image of one pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps is something that one could not do. If you're pulling on your bootstraps, how could you be climbing? But it's part of the American mythology, making myths that are not biologically possible when you actually act them out. But again, for her, she said, if you tell yourself one story versus another story, that will determine whether or not you even, because there are people who think legacy, which is like by virtue of being born to someone, they even think of legacy as some kind of manifest destiny. And so that would sum up, I think, a lot of how I think about legacy at these elite universities.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I mean, it was so interesting just to hear you kind of describe that, and I will leave the title of that book you mentioned in the description of this video, because I think a lot of times people just really don't understand the power of people kind of concealing and hiding information from you. If you know, and I'm just going to just say it
Yes,
plainly like that,
yes, that is a
because
beautiful way to put it. Yes.
yeah, because as you're going through your education experience, there's so many different distractions, you know. So it could be this, you know, it could be fashion, it could be trends, you know, not just fashion trends, but like, you know, music and films and all of these different sources that's kind of informing you of what you should be and what you should do. And what you realize as you're on your educational journey, and that's if you're really committed to that journey, right? You realize that universities are really a gateway. And I think that's one of the things that and I'm not going to say that Americans don't understand or appreciate that. But I do think Americans have a different level of distraction because of the way the culture is set. The culture is set up to kind of, I think personally, have blacks kind of distracted with issues. So the media will, even now, as you know, we have so many different sources of information, and we have these apps kind of telling us what's important and everything. It's so easy to kind of distract the masses of black people to kind of, you know, whether it's somebody being harmed by law enforcement, or you know, some, you know, court case that didn't go the way we wanted it to go, or some injustice here or there. You kind of get so distracted with it, sometimes you really don't realize that it's a distraction, in a sense where there's still a pathway that you need to have for your life, for your children's lives, for the young people who follow you, to this gate, you know, these gateway, these pathways to success. You know, and I say to success, I'm talking about, you know, teaching your children really early on about math, about science, about, you know, technology, and how it informs how we do things and how we can have advancements in these areas, and how that child can like contribute to those advancements. I think when we miss empowering children to think about things that way, and I say that as a black mother, realizing the, you know, and acknowledging the reality that once you miss those opportunities, when you have a, you know, young child going through the school system, trying to put that into a college, you know, the student, now this person has graduated from high school, you're introducing them to concepts around, you know, math, science, being responsible as a student, focusing on your work, deadlines, complete. It's almost like setting this person up for failure. So no wonder you have um students going into, you know, and I'm talking about inner city students. Students come from these inner city school systems that are poorly funded, poorly resourced. Because in Philadelphia, let's just be clear, the word inner city doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to a
Yeah.
bad school, right? Because Central, Girls High, uh, um, the other one, drawing a blank on it, is over at the Spring Garden area, Philadelphia. You know, these are not schools that you would be thinking. You're not thinking inner city, my child's in a bad school. You know, these are like, you know, the schools that children really want to get into, or any of the other schools that have like magnet programs within, you know, the high school. So there's no way for you to really say that your child's not gifted just because, or no one, how should I say, no one would say your child is not gifted because they're going to a school located in the inner city. Philadelphia, and I'm sure other major cities is like that, where, you know, great schools, top rated schools can be located really anywhere within the city. But, you know, when you have these children coming from, you know, children growing up in these school systems, and they're being educated throughout their whole, you know, pre-high college experiences is all in these school systems. Then when they go to college, they have the rude awakening that it's like, oh wow, this is the gateway. That time is almost too late. So
Yeah.
if that child is really, really committed to the process, then that child is probably going to be spending a lot of time in college making up for what did not happen earlier. And now it's not free. Now
No,
you're paying
that
for it.
was very much my experience. One of the things that I discovered at Penn was that it's very interesting because a lot this a lot of people I know who went to Central, Girls High, and boarding schools, what was interesting is they read a lot of more modern literature,
Hmm.
whereas going to Philadelphia public school, again, but still, I've only gone to Philadelphia public schools that had white people. So
Hmm.
as a result of that, no white child can be left behind. So I did benefit from going to schools with white students my whole life. But I had these teachers, especially in high school, who had us read all of the classics, like all the Greek mythology, Shakespeare, British literature, all of it. And when I got to Penn, what was interesting was for a lot of students, for a lot of professors, because the professors are from the old school. So for a lot of the older professors, I actually had the background that they wanted because
Okay.
I read the classics. I had not read modern, really any modern literature. Um, Even the American literature I read for the most part was older. But what did happen, what I did see is that that only helped me in the early class, let's say my first 2 years in the beginner, the low level course. Because what those other students had that I didn't have was they had better note-taking skills.
Mm.
They knew the resources to go to for shortcuts on like this author or this series of books or this resource gives us summaries of things, or this is a way to, this resource explains science in a simpler way. And so while I had the background to take me through those first 2 years, I found that as I got to the higher level, I really suffered because there was another layer of education missing. So one of my very good friends from university, I remember her father's a rather famous politician in Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania, I'd say. And one of the things he used to say to her, because we'd go visit him quite a bit at his office um, to get money for what we thought were essential things. But now, in hindsight, they were non-essential. But he would do this thing where he very much, he had the money ready for her, but he gave us a lecture and she'd bring me along. She's like, maybe he will not talk so much if you're there with me. But he was like, I don't care. And he's also an alum from Penn. And I remember what he said. There's one thing he said to us that always that stuck with me. He said, remember when you're at Penn, that the difference between you and a lot of those students, predominantly the white students, is not the wealth, the financial wealth that they've inherited. He said, but it is the intellectual wealth. It is the infrastructural wealth that they have inherited that is allowing them to advance. And at first, I didn't understand what he was saying because I was so young. But then I understood it when I saw those letters to the university. When people at the outset said, this Spanish class, this Spanish placement test, it was too difficult. If I would have said the Spanish test was too difficult, or people like me would have said it, the university would have said that I was crying sour grapes. But because people of privilege said it, they believed it. And so there is this idea, there's so much that, so many intangibles that you get just by being in the room. Did that answer, did that?
Yeah, it did. I mean, what it's bringing to me is, one of the things that I've been exploring recently. I'm a lifelong learner. I'm very big on, kind of learning about different disciplines or different fields and kind of going through certificate programs. So after graduate school, I was always kind of on the fence if I would go and get my doctorate. But one of the things I always thought to myself, like, the difficult thing for me is I would really hate to to get my doctorate in something that I was like just looking at like as the next best step. And then really I would be missing out on all these other cool things that people are learning. And I'm really interested in how people design curriculums and kind of like what, I'm just always curious about where certain areas of healthcare in particular, because that's really my arena, is going based on looking at these certificates, right? So a lot of these little snapshot certificate programs, like even if you're looking at Coursera or edX or Udemy or General Assembly, where you can, go through these boot camps, you can go through these certificate programs, and they're nice ways of just kind of giving you a nice, clear, without all of the fluff, God's concentrated, information in a particular area, and you get a real good understanding of, let's say, certain concepts that sometimes you probably never thought you could actually see together. And so, essentially, when I always looking for programs, I start running into these interesting, engineering certificate programs or project management certificate
Yes.
programs. And they would be marrying these kind of concepts that made sense. I mean, it would make sense to have nurse engineer or nurse scientist or a healthcare systems engineer. It's like, wow, yeah, that does make sense. Healthcare is a system, so having a systems engineering certificate program specific to healthcare or healthcare project management, having project management curriculum that is specific to healthcare, just like that makes perfect sense. But the more I start looking into these certificate programs, the more I kind of got away from, the doctorate program. So maybe I'll find one that I love and I'm looking at it and say, this has everything I want. But see, if you're not really out there shopping around, you don't really get to see that there's so many different programs and opportunities for you to learn about different, acquire different skills or sharpen certain skills you may have, or upscale. And these opportunities, unfortunately, are missed by individuals, like you were saying about your own experience of like kind of not knowing that there was another layer of information missing. This is often, too often, the experience of students coming through school systems. Again, I love what you said, mentioned that politician had explained to you about, and about infrastructure, because again, looking at the opposite side of the spectrum, you know, when you have the lack of infrastructure, right? You have students, you have someone going through their learning experience where they're not really necessarily thinking that there's a pathway, right? Or there's a way that something needs to be done. When those students are saying, "Oh no, that's too difficult," what they're pretty much saying is there's a possibility that this could go away. let's explore the possibility of this going away. Where in your if you're not even aware of the the infrastructure that goes
Yep.
behind things, or that there's a process, that things are just not things just don't happen out of the blue. Like
Not at
essentially that
all.
politician, excuse me.
And I said, not at all. I love the way
Right.
you put things, there is something behind it. Things
Right.
don't
Like
just come out of the
right.
blue.
See, the thing about it is, one of the things that I had as an advantage is working for my family business, right? So, growing up working in a family business, I got to actually see, okay, this is how the money that comes in gets
Yep.
spent to keep this on the shelf. And then this is how you replenish things. It's like, to see it in its very simplistic form, just like, oh, okay, this customer's like this. Okay, this is why this is always gone. We need to have this. Oh, but some customers come in for this item, so they need to see that we have it here, but we don't need too much of it here because enough people don't come for that. It's like, when you get to actually think about things in that process, it's almost like in your mind, you're almost thinking about like things at like a factory. you know have
Yes.
I had the privilege of thinking about that process, like almost as if I was in my own kind of process engineering program in my head when I was really young, because I could kind of see, even I think I was like 12 or 13 the first time I started working in a family business. So just seeing that whole process and seeing everything and being a part of everything and being a part of those conversations, and those conversations, you know those discussions, having those discussions in front of me, it helped me to kind of think about things from a different perspective. A lot of children don't have that experience growing up in inner city, and so because of that, you know the possibility of something working better, right? Because essentially what those students were saying, um, or maybe even their parents were saying, is, oh, this could be better if we just eliminate this thing here. Oh, like, just eliminate this, or do away with it, or change the way it is, because it's, and I mean, I don't know if you really quite get what I'm saying when I'm saying that. It's like, the just to actually even open your mouth and know that this is
Yes.
something that you could even request. Because again, going back to what I was saying about um, the different certificate programs, right? If you don't have exposure to these, again, infrastructure, because when I look at curriculum, I look at it from a perspective of kind of like a blue, like not a blueprint, but yes, some of them like that, like you're actually getting to see like the layout, the system layout. This is what we're going to do. And if all things work well, then after you're done this course or this curriculum or certificate, there's going to be X, Y, Z job waiting for you at the on the other side, right? So if you're able to understand the infrastructure, essentially you understand parts of that system that can we can do without, parts of that system, but you have to actually know that you are kind of at you don't have to necessarily be in the driver's seat. You could be in the passenger seat, but at least you're looking at the road, right? There's a certain advantage you have, that you have access to look at the road. You speak differently knowing that you have access to look at the road. The problem I think happens for a lot of underserved individuals, specifically Black students, is that there's so many distractions. There's so many things pulling you away from, being in the driver's seat, or at least saying, hey, listen, I want 5 minutes to look at the road. Can I get to look at the road? Like, you really don't even understand how you have influence in society, how you have influence in the direction things are going. So sometimes I think, honestly, I know it sounds kind of crazy connection, but sometimes when I see certain behaviors in young Black individuals who are just kind of like, primarily young Black boys, but young Black girls as well, just that I grew up with, maybe even some of my own decisions, right? Growing up in a lot of these, just representative of other young people growing up in these environments. you think to yourself, wow, did some of these decisions kind of come out of just not knowing, like having direction, not knowing where things are going to next, kind of being in an unpredictable space where you just kind of say, hopefully I make it out of school this year. Like like sometimes I think even when if you watch the news and you say, oh wow, wonder what those kids were thinking, where their parents at, and you get the sense that these children are not thinking about a future. And so, why are they not thinking about a future? Well, let's think about it this way. Even if you make big plans that you want to do something in 10 years, you kind of think about everything you need to do every single day to get to that, to the 10 years, right? Well, just imagine if instead of me giving you access to like the 10-year plan, I'm telling you that there's no guarantee that tomorrow you'll be here. There's no guarantee that tomorrow food won't
No,
be
but
food
not that
insecurity.
no guarantee, but I'm telling you that it's likely that you won't be here tomorrow.
Right. Exactly. All right, there you go. Even better. So it's likely that you won't have food. It's likely that you won't. So am I worried now? Again, think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Am I worried about the food I'm going to eat? Or am I worried about looking on the road? And so the thing about it is, you know, going back to what I was even saying about my journey in these certificate programs, it's become somewhat of a little interest of mine. After the first one, and then the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one, I realized, okay, maybe I'm onto something. Maybe I found something that I like, and I didn't even realize that I like it. But I think I'd like it. I think I kind of like these things, because it really does help you to kind of see where things are going, especially when you have certain institutions kind of stewing and mixing the pot of these cool, disciplines that they're just kind of mixing together. But I'm not naive enough to believe like, oh, this is so exciting that I'm not seeing, okay, like this is a sign of things to come. If they're mixing these concepts together, then on the other side of this is an industry that they're carving out. These when you talk about your Udemy and the edX and General Assembly and Coursera, they're all pretty much designing courses for the needs, the skills that are needed for jobs that are currently, um, either emerging, or they're currently, they're looking for people with these skill sets. So they have to create these certificate programs to upskill people to fill these roles,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Where they need this specialized knowledge. So again, when I think about nurses, particularly BIPOC nurses, and I think to myself, do you want to have, a career that is fruitful, where on the next side you're looking for like the next thing that's coming. You want to be prepared for the next, opportunity. You want, if there is, an opportunity in particular role, you feel comfortable and confident applying for that role, not just because you've been at a company for 10 or 15 years, but because you really honestly feel like as that company, has been growing, you've been seeing areas where you can add value, but you've also been picking up skills because you've been doing the continuing education. So you can kind of see where things are going. Because again, think about what I'm just, as I'm saying this, I just want to stress this to you because it's actually even coming clearer to me. I mean, think about even when you're at work. Some people go to work every single day and they just hope that every single day things will be stable enough that they don't have to worry about putting anything together. They don't have to worry about responding to any emergencies. They just want to show up to work and everything is just fine. Even people in these upper management positions, right? They will want things to just want to come in and just have what I think everybody wishes to have, you know, days where you just no one would complain about work, where you just can show up to work and just do the same job every single day and that would be it. But I mean, just imagine how you don't evolve, you don't grow, you don't have, take advantage of opportunities when you don't see where trends are within your industry. See, continual education allows you to see where things are going. One of the best things I've ever done was to acquire my certification as a risk adjustment coder, because just in maintaining my CEUs requires that I have to have this, these meetings and conferences, and I have to go to events to maintain the CEUs. And so therefore, I'm always talking and learning from people who are telling me of things that's going on in other areas of healthcare, and also things that are going to be changing in the future. I'm always like 10 steps ahead, because of the fact that I'm forced to share this to gain this information, because of the fact that this is just a part of maintaining the CUs. So again, having your eyes or access to that road, it's a huge game changer. And I think that one of the things that I always loved or admired about the Ivy League institutions, some of them you named today, earlier in this call here, is that you the curriculums, the what they have going on in their curriculum, and the cutting edge uh designs of what's looming, what's coming up next, the next thing, that's the next big thing. They're like, these are like they're like little laboratories, for thought leaders, and for the leaders of tomorrow. And you really want people to take part of that. And it's kind of like, how do you get people to get into that space when you have barriers, like, even if it's not just the affirmative action being cut by the Supreme Court, it's really the symbolism of it. Because institutions, if they value diversity, they will find ways to still maintain the diversity of their student
Yeah,
body. And it's not that it's completely not a factor at all, because you can write in your essay for admission. You can write your whole story about how your how you think you can contribute, your unique and diverse experience can contribute to the student body. And university can make a decision to enroll you just based off of the fact that you're bringing these unique skills to the table. So it's not that it's going to be or not skills only, but your life experience. So it's not that it's completely done away with, but they do have the institutions are not required. So these institutions are not required to use race as a factor for admission. Interestingly enough, I'm sure military schools can continue to use
I
race
thought
as a
that was
factor for admission.
that to me was the thing that I think, while people are amplifying and highlighting so many things that were said, um, I think the fact that they carved out an exception for the military, I've only heard a few people amplifying that. And that is the thing that really needs some scrutiny.
It
Why?
also it what it
Why,
also
pray
shows.
tell, why would you specifically carve out that exception if you, in fact, believe that racial preference is so it's maybe anti-intellectual, anti-constitutional. Like, if you think it's anti-American, why would you then carve out that exception for the most storied of American institutions?
And that essentially should help everyone understand the true problem that affirmative action was set in place to fix. Because if you miss that if you miss that point there, that they still want race to be a factor
Hmm.
for admission, then you miss why affirmative action was put in place to begin with. Affirmative action was put in place to begin with because it's one thing if you say, I love the United States of America and I want to fight for this country. It's another thing when you say, I have no other option. This would be the
No
best thing
other.
for me to do to get out of poverty. So when you make access to the you know, military.
Yeah.
You can blow up there. Like you can go there and we can see maybe you'll blow up, maybe you won't blow up. We can dice it. We can take our chances there. But we want access to the boardroom. We want that to be exclusively set aside for these because we know that that's the pathway to wealth. It's funny. One of the most uh revolutionary experiences that I had as far as changing my mind and the way I really thought about things. It wasn't just simply education. I think I had the biggest epiphany of my life is when I actually went to purchase my first home. In that process, I realized how the keeping people in the dark and how so many games are played to kind of keep people in certain contained and confined in certain areas. When you think about an FHA loan versus a conventional loan, and how the person selling the home that you're buying the home from could actually look at that and say, "Oh, I don't want anyone with FHA home loan," or the fact that um, that just this the decisions that's made around allowing someone to move into your neighborhood, if you want to call it your neighborhood, right? So there's so much ways that so much gatekeeping and so many ways that people could just cut you out of access. You just think about it, you're like, wow, there's just, again, like you said, the way you've opened my mind as far as thinking about affirmative action when you were talking about that whole diversity piece on Penn campus, your experience. And again, for me, I think about my experience purchasing my first home. It was just wow, like, okay, there's the fact that when you buy a home, you meet there's an agent there that's kind of helping you with that process. At any point in time a person could look at anything about you and say, well, we don't really want that type of person in our neighborhood, and that's just it. So it's so important for us to know early on, like all of these, like what you need to know to prepare yourself for these different points in your life and different experiences that you're bound to have. And many of these experiences are not really changing. If you talk to somebody 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago, unfortunately so many of these stories they could have prepared you for, because not much of it has changed. A lot of the systems that we have in place to keep people confined, keep people ignorant, keep people in the dark, hide information for them, give some people an advantage and other people a disadvantage. And you when you see those practices just kind of going from generation to generation, you realize that people really should be better prepared, because like so many people before you had the same exact experience. So it's almost like, well, what keeps people from sharing this information? And I'm just left again with this the cycle of being distracted, whether it's with work or trying to maintain or whatever, and people just not sitting down and just telling people like, no, this is the reality of what you need to prepare yourself for. Because like with you, I mean, you were at University of Penn having this epiphany, like, oh man, now I can see where the difference is. I can see that these are individuals who have certain access to um, they have access to information. They know what these resources are, and I'm spending hours at the library, and they're telling me, "Oh, everything's over here." And I'm like, okay, I'm looking at these people. They're after class, they're spending their time, you know, doing something leisurely. I'm spending my time, you know, you know, cracking open this textbook and that textbook, and I'm in a library, and not to necessarily better myself. It's just because I'm working longer. They're working smarter technically because they have access to better resources, or they know where those resources are. And I'm just going around the long way because I'm, just figuring this whole thing out on my own. So this has been a very, 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 very healthy discussion. I'm probably going to have to break this up in two sections. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I think one of the main things, one last thing or something I'd say to wrap this up is that when we think about affirmative action, one of the things that I attempted to do in law school, I found that, so a lot of times when you hear a Supreme Court person is being nominated, or for the Supreme, excuse me, a lawyer is being nominated for Supreme Court, or somebody who is a lawyer is running for office, a lot of times people look at their legal note or law journal articles, because we also have to write a long research, almost like a thesis, that kind of paper about some controversial topic, legal topic. And when I was in university, a lot of people wrote about affirmative action. And as they were talking to me, I started really, I did not write about affirmative action because I actually don't find it to be controversial. I find that people want it to be controversial, even though it is very clear to everyone what affirmative action is and who it actually benefits. But in an effort to kind of think about what affirmative action is, I said to myself, I think my problem, or the problem we're having, is we think of affirmative action as an American program, but it's not. The largest affirmative action program in the world is in India. Then Malaysia has it, Brazil has it. But India has the largest affirmative action program in the world. And Thomas Sowell, who I don't necessarily agree on many things with him, he decided to look at affirmative action around the world to better understand affirmative action as it's being implemented in America. And one of the things that I saw in stepping back from affirmative action is, and looking at affirmative action all around the world, is that affirmative action essentially, at the thing that holds it back always, is that you're asking people who have a certain unearned privilege with a strong sense of entitlement to have a different POV, to actually say, like, can you look through the long lens of history? Can you perhaps step into my historical shoes and see a certain thing? But I was kind of going off the track. But what universities realize 100%, not from just being in classrooms, but from being on long airplane rides, from working out at the gym, from their mommy and me and daddy and me group, is that when you meet people from different backgrounds, you learn more. They just add so much more to your knowledge and understanding of the world. They help you get a more complex, complicated, beautiful mosaic view of the world. And that is why all of these institutions are going to fight like hell to keep diversity on campus. It is not because they want to see Black faces. It is because they understand from having a long airplane ride that the passengers sitting next to you, they have interesting lives and they add value. And that would put a bow on what I need to say.
Well, thank you so much. This is the first time I actually am having a discussion with someone who is not a nurse. I thought it was very important for me to have this discussion with you in particular because I really wanted to speak with someone who had an experience um, living and learning and studying at an Ivy League institution. Was not afforded that opportunity, and I think that the reason why so much attention really is looking at affirmative actions at of course affirmative action and how it plays out in these Ivy League, institutions is really because of the fact that these are the areas, the spaces that most people are just fighting, to get into. But if we really think about it, as you mentioned earlier, how expansive that is, not just the United States, but in other countries that have their own affirmative action policies, and also how this kind of plays out in different ways, right? And how you can address different areas or different types of diversity with affirmative action. So I do really believe that this affirmative action, the reason why they'll never really get away from it, is these institutions as far as their admission processes is because, like you said, the value that's added. And essentially, it's no different than when people say they want to travel the world because they want to see how other people live. Well, I mean, you could save yourself the cash, right? You get a lot more value out of that experience when you have somebody say, "Oh, this is exactly what this experience is," just like the conversation we're having right now. We want to hear from you. Schedule a free consultation or send us an email at advancednurses@acd4n.com or visit our websites www.advancednurses.info or www.acd4n.com.